welcome to another Topic of the Week video. And this week, it's Halloween month, which means a whole new set of topics based on a new theme. And this month's theme is video game adaptations, especially movies.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Well, anyway, let's get on with it. This week's topic was submitted by Angel89 on the Discord, and her topic is: most video game adaptations are terrible. Why are most terrible, and what can be done to fix this problem? Maybe some examples off the top of your head of the few good adaptations, and the many bad ones, and the few that are kinda in between. There are not very many examples of good adaptations. Honestly, I'll be getting into why, because there's a lot to talk about. To start off, I've always really liked the Prince of Persia movie. Now, I do admit, I'm only vaguely familiar with the video games. I think I played the first Sands of Time game when I was like a kid, a little bit. I don't really remember. But for the most part, what that movie does is that it takes the concept of it and it tells its own story, which I'm fine with. I mean, honestly, if you're not going to be directly adapting it, then honestly, that's really the next best thing. And honestly, I don't know how my opinion of the movie would change if I had played the games, but ultimately, I think the movie was still enjoyable, and I thought it was at least decent. I genuinely enjoyed it. But I don't want to focus too much on it, just because I think I would have to play the games and compare them before I really would say, yeah, it's a great adaptation. But at the very least, I appreciate the fact that they tried to do something with it, and they came out with a decently enjoyable movie. One of the best examples, I would actually say, actually comes from the Persona 4 anime. Now, we'll be talking about this later on in the month, so I won't be going into too much depth, because we will be diving in depth on that in a later topic. But what this does is it distills the actual story, because the Persona games are long. They're very long. You can spend hours upon hours upon hours playing them. So even having a 20-something, episode run, you're still going to have to condense it. This is an important thing, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later. But when you have a story like this that's really long, you're going to have to cut stuff. You're going to have to focus on what's important. And you're really going to have to understand how to fit all of those pieces together. Because when you have the Persona games, you'll be playing those for dozens of hours. So how do you take that and form it into a set of episodes? You have to focus on the plot, which is what the Persona 4 anime did. I want to make this abundantly clear. I'm talking about Persona 4 the animation, not the Persona 4 Golden anime, because those are two separate things. And the Golden anime, well, there are some things I like about it. Not good. Not good. But in Persona 4 the animation, it focuses on the plot. It incorporates some of the side stuff like the social links. And it does a good job focusing on the main characters. It gives them decent enough focus and development. So even if you hadn't played the game, I would outright say that the anime is a really good place to start, because it gives you that experience without you having to play the games. In fact, the Persona 4 anime is how I got into Persona. It's how I started playing the actual games, because it's how I ended up getting into Persona 5 and, in the overall series. And this is an important point I'll be going into a little bit later. Actually knowing how to condense a story is kind of important. The sad part is there are not a lot of good adaptations. You will see some decent adaptations that involve anime, like I'm talking about Persona 4 the animation. You'll have far worse luck in looking at movies. And it's important to talk about why these almost always fail. There are some people out there who will say things like, oh, well, video games just couldn't make a good movie because, video games just don't have good stories. Wrong. Very wrong. While there are a lot of video games with terrible stories, or stories that are just paper-thin excuses to have a game happen, there are a lot of games that have good stories. You have games like Metal Gear Solid 3, a lot of the Fire Emblem games, a lot of the Zelda games, and even several of the Batman Arkham games had good stories.
Not to mention a personal favorite of mine, Deus Ex Human Revolution.
I never asked for this.
A video game, just like any other medium, can have a good or a bad story. You can look at movies that have bad stories, books that have bad stories, TV shows that have bad stories, radio dramas that have bad stories. Bad writing exists across all mediums, so it's unfair to single out video games as saying that that's incapable of having a good story. No. This also glosses over the actual people responsible for why these video game adaptations tend to be really bad. Because guess what? This all boils down to who's making it. The thing is, with a lot of these movies, you'll see this a lot in video game movie adaptations. You'll have, writers and directors who just don't care. A lot of them are doing it for a paycheck. But here's the thing. They're not doing it because they love the original work. They're doing it just to make some money. This is why a lot of these movies tend to be really awful. One of the worst examples of this is the Resident Evil movies by Paul W.S. Anderson. All of those movies are trash. All of them. And yes, the fact that they're not following the games is a big contributing factor. But it's made by people who just don't care. Now, they'll pull superficial aspects of the games, and as the movies went on, they started doing this more and more. Now, I have talked in past topics about the Resident Evil movies, but you can clearly see that the people making this, they don't really care about the games. They don't care about the game characters. They care more about Alice, who's a freaking stupid Mary Sue black hole of just complete worthlessness. And the Resident Evil movies don't really have anything to do with the Resident Evil games outside of using some imagery from the games just for merchandising and advertisement. Look, a lot of the Resident Evil games can be very cheesy B-movie-esque. I mean, come on. You look at the Resident Evil 1 especially, it can be kind of cheesy.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
It can be cheesy. But if you're making a movie and it was based on the first game, all you really need to do is take the base story, condense it down to movie length, because if you only have about 2 or so hours to work with, and you've got a multi-hour game, you're going to have to condense things a little bit to make it work. But condense what's important. Keep Chris, Jill, Barry, Wesker, have them do their things. And you know what? Write around it. You know what? You're going to have to change stuff. And here's the important thing. Pretty much everyone understands that, yeah, if you're making a movie based on a video game, there will have to be some sacrifices. Some things will have to be condensed. Some things will have to be cut. Some things will have to be changed. It's just the nature of an adaptation. You look at a movie adaptation of a book, there's always going to be changes. The difference is why they're making these changes, and if these changes are for the better or for the worse. It's really important to understand what is important, what you need to keep, and what you need to change. Because if you were making a Resident Evil movie based on the first Resident Evil game, there's a lot you'd have to cut. You'd cut a lot of boss fights, because that doesn't really need to happen. You would have to condense Jill and Chris's story into one, which you can do. In fact, Umbrella Chronicles basically did that. I mean, I would say you'd have to include side characters like Rebecca, but as long as you're focusing on the important stuff and actually making sure that this is a good story, the movie would turn out fine. And that's the real crux of this. The writing will be good if they actually write it good. It's not because it's a video game. It's not because it's a movie based on a video game. It's if the writing is good. If you made a good movie based on Resident Evil that wasn't completely nonsensical, if they made good movies based on the Resident Evil games, they wouldn't be so infamously bad. You can make movies based off of Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil 4. 5, that's where things start getting a little rocky in the games. But you see my point. You have plenty of material here to build off of to make several movies. In fact, if you just wanted to stop at Code Veronica, where you kind of end a lot of the stuff with, Umbrella, then, that'd be fine. But that's not what they do. You see in so many video game movie adaptations that just completely change everything. They may throw in a few references or nods to the games, but they'll be completely changing everything to the point of absurdity. I mentioned changing stuff in the Sands of Time movie. Okay, that was doing its own thing with the same basic concept. But there are some stories, like Resident Evil, there's a very specific setup with that. You can't just completely change everything about this and then expect it to be, oh, well, that'll just be fine. For anyone out there who's played video games, how many times have you watched a movie based on a video game that you like, and you're just sitting there pissed off that they didn't include anything from the games? Or if they do include it, it's almost insultingly little. That's the problem. Now, I know a lot of times this is done because they want to appeal to a wider audience and not just the game players. But okay, if you're not going to include anything based on the game, then why are you even bothering to make a movie based on a video game? This is a problem I have with the Tomb Raider movie, the new one, which that will be getting its own topic. Holy crap, because that movie does not include hardly anything from the actual game, despite the fact that they lift its basic premise and use a few things that are kind of similar to the game, and even at some points outright lift some scenes, and then everything else is completely changed. You clearly didn't want to tell this story, so why did you pick it? A movie that pissed me the hell off was the Red Faction movie that was made by Sci-Fi. Okay, so I played Red Faction Guerrilla, and I actually really enjoyed the game. And then I heard that they were making a movie based on it. Now, it turns out this movie was kind of a sequel to it. I'm like, alright, that's cool. Then I watched it. So, this movie kills off my favorite character from the game, Sam. So it confirms that Sam and Alec got together. Yay, I shipped that when I played the game. And then they had kids. Alright, cool, happy ending. Then she dies. She doesn't even get the dignity of actually dying during the story. She's killed in backstory. Just to fuel angst. This is what I'm talking about. These people don't care about the games. Even if this wasn't an adaptation of the game, which I kind of like the idea that you do a sequel, but you don't do something stupid like this. And the whole movie was just really awful anyway. I thought it was just really generic and stupid. It really felt like a Sci-Fi Channel original movie with just a Red Faction skin just thrown on it. It was frustrating. I know a lot of people have faced these kinds of frustrations when they've watched other movies like that, because you can tell that the people making this either didn't play the game at all, don't like it, don't give a flying crap and think it's all dumb and stupid, and they're just looking to get a quick paycheck. So even if this isn't about a video game adaptation, there is a story that's kind of relevant to this that really kind of shines a light on this mindset. So the guy who wrote Dragon Ball Evolution, infamously one of the worst movie adaptations of anything ever, it butchers Dragon Ball, which is, that's bad territory to cross into. But the guy, relatively recently, many years after the movie came out, just up and came out to say that, yeah, he's sorry for writing a really terrible movie. He was just writing it for a quick buck. He didn't care about Dragon Ball. He didn't really research Dragon Ball. He did not care. He was just there to pick up a paycheck. He threw something together, and it was terrible. And he openly admits that. And it's like, yeah. I mean, kudos to him for apologizing, because outright coming out and saying, yeah, I'm the guy who did that, that's a great way to paint a target on you. But at the very least, everyone was pretty cool with that. Like, okay, yeah, he apologized because it was really terrible. But unfortunately, this is the mindset made with a lot of these adaptations. And shoot, I even talked about this when I was doing videos on the Full Metal Alchemist and Bleach live-action movies from Japan. They were just really crappy movies made by people who clearly didn't care. This stuff doesn't just happen to video games, unfortunately. Because, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who want to make money off of an existing property without paying respect to it, which is just going to end up with a mess. And it really blows my mind that so many of these people don't care to actually put any effort into something like this. It's like, okay, you see a video game. All right, there's at least some popularity that you can use to leverage for some notoriety, some, you know, free advertisement to get people excited. But then you're like, yeah, but we don't want to actually do anything with that, so we're just kind of going to do whatever. We're going to make some generic movie and act like it's related to the video games. And this can very, very, very simply be solved by just getting people who care involved. I mean, shoot. Look at the difference between Jar Jar Abrams and Ruin Johnson's movies compared to Rogue One. Rogue One's actually good. But then The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi are just really awful. Because you've got J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson. They don't care. Whatever. They're mainly here for a paycheck. But, on the other hand, Gareth Edwards, who's making Rogue One, actually cared. And that shines through. That care made the difference. If you put J.J. Abrams in charge of Rogue One, it would not have been good. This is what they need to be doing with movie adaptations of video games. And just adaptations overall. I mean, it doesn't even matter if this is a 26 episode anime based off of a video game. It doesn't matter if it's a movie based off of a video game. You have to have people who care. Or people who are willing to care and willing to put in the time to research. Because I'm not saying that, you only have to have people who already know. Because sometimes, if you bring in someone who actually cares about doing a good job, and say, okay, we're going to be making this off of, say, this video game. And then you'd have that person say, play the video game. Try to figure out, okay, how are we going to do a story based off of this? Have people who are willing to put in that work. And this is what guts me, is that sometimes you do see some people involved in this. It's usually an actor or so, where they actually do care about the source material. And then they get saddled with directors and writers who don't give a flying crap, completely wasting everything. One of a great example, a very frustrating example, is the actress who played Jill in the Resident Evil movies. When she was cast as a protagonist from the games, she was like, all right, cool. So she got the games, she was researching, so she paid attention to how, like, Jill walked in the games. She was paying attention to Jill's character to try to absorb as much as she could so that she could portray the character as best as possible. And that's a very important thing for actors to do. I mean, I've acted myself in plays, and it's very important to build that character, and it's very important to understand that character and understand how that will affect how you act in it. And all of this actress's efforts in researching Jill get completely wasted because the movies aren't focused on the actual protagonists. They're focused on freaking Alice. It's the Alice show. So she, who is playing a main character from the games, gets shoved to the side just so that Mila Djokovic can take the spotlight. But you see, if everyone, at the very least, if you had the right people who cared enough to actually put in that level of effort, you could actually have good movies. A story I've heard a lot is that in one of the writers involved with the Wrath of Khan movie wasn't really familiar with Star Trek before he came on. So he got familiar with Star Trek. He watched it and he, absorbed the information from the show to sort of write the story of Wrath of Khan so that it was good. And that's the thing. And I've done this myself before, because sometimes I'll get into something, and it's like, yeah, because you might want to write a sequel, or you may want to do a rewrite, or you may want to change something, but like, you don't have to have some like years worth of experience with something. If you have, writers and directors who are willing to go and put in the effort to research the game, to actually make something good, you could have good video game movies. You could have good video game series. It's frustrating, and it all boils down to people who are willing to put in the effort. And really, that's what any good movie or any good adaptation really boils down to. You can see in movie adaptations of books, some of them are better than others. Some actually do focus on the important stuff that really captures what the book was about, even if it doesn't include 100% of the story, because it's just unfeasible. Unless you're splitting this up amongst like multiple movies, doing like a mini-series. Like I watched the mini-series for The Count of Monte Cristo. It was a French-made one. And that mostly covers the story from the book, which is a lot longer than what would actually fit in just a 2-hour movie. But regardless of the actual medium used, this could even be a comic adaptation of a game or a book adaptation of a game. It doesn't matter what the medium is. You have to have people willing to work on it. You have to have people willing to put in the time to research and understand it if they don't already, and then translate that into something that's cohesive for the medium that they're working on, usually movies. And here's the thing. People will understand that things will have to be cut, things will have to be changed. But as long as you're trying to actually do something good, if you're trying to capture what the game was about, if you're trying to distill the important parts of the story and trying to be as faithful as possible, while then putting it together in a cohesive and well-made package, you could have something good. And unfortunately, that just doesn't happen all that often. Because all too often, you'll have a studio and a director and a writer who don't care and are just seeing this as a paycheck. Which is a huge shame, because there's so many times when you look at a game and you're just like, this could make a great movie if they really cared. Like if you took like BioShock. It's like, yeah, you could make a good movie. I would prefer to go with a miniseries, but if you had to make a movie, yeah, there's a lot of stuff you'd have to cut down, and unfortunately you would probably end up losing stuff that some people liked. You would probably have to lose a few good scenes just because you need to fit into the time constraints. But if it was properly distilled, if it was properly condensed into a way that still kept the good parts and still kept the story, and it made everything flow, because that's important, because you're taking a medium that has a player playing the game and oftentimes doing a whole bunch of just random stuff, random fighting, and then trying to translate that into a movie. You're not going to have 30 hours of watching someone run around shooting things, because that ain't fun to just watch. So you have to condense it and make it work. And that's really it. That is where this all comes down. You have to make it work. And you have to care. Because if these people making these adaptations don't care, then you're just going to get crap. Unfortunately. So really, until we get more people who are directors and writers and producers and stuff who actually care, and care enough about something, and just care enough about doing their job to put out something good, we're really not going to see much improvement. And I mean, I really hope that we can get more adaptations, more video game movies, more video game anime series that are really faithful to the source material. But until then, we're left with a bunch of really bad adaptations. Well, I think that's a good place to stop for today. If you want to submit a topic to me, you can comment below if you're on YouTube. If you're on Tumblr, send me an ask and put topic : then whatever topic you want me to talk about. Or if you're on the Discord, you can go to the topic submissions channel and submit a topic there. Just make sure to follow the rules I'll be posting down below. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when you get that done. So what are some video game adaptations that you want to talk about, good or bad? Please comment below. And thank you for watching.